The Lindsay Clancy case is finally headed to trial, and if you've been following the headlines over the past couple of years, you know that this is one of the most shocking crimes that we've had to cover on this channel. The emotions are so strong, they're overshadowing a lot of what's actually going to be decided by the jury in this case. I'm John. I'm an actual 911 dispatcher. I'm joined as always by Drew, who is a police officer for 29 years, and we're going to tell you the 3 things that you need to know before this trial begins. Make sure you watch to the end because we're going to explain why this trial is going to be unlike most other cases. Well, let's start, Drew, with the basic facts. Right now, prosecutors say that Lindsay Clancy sent her ex-husband, or her husband Patrick, out of the house on some errands to 3V restaurant and a CVS pharmacy to pick up some meds for the kids. They're saying that Lindsay used exercise resistance bands to kill her 3 children, 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. Then she went out of a second-story window in what authorities described as an apparent attempt on her own life. She survived that. Patrick came home to a scene no parent should ever have to witness. Police arrived, Drew, and they tried to save the baby who was still alive at the time of their arrival, but he passed away at the hospital a few days later. To all this, Lindsay has pleaded not guilty. Now, Drew, the first thing that we need to understand before we get into this case is the 911 call. We all know that true crime stories, the best ones start with a 911 phone call. Right now, the 911 phone call placed by Patrick has not been released publicly. The defense has tried to limit or exclude this 911 call to keep the jury from hearing all of it or part of it. But the judge has said that this 911 call is going to be in. The jury is going to hear it, and it's very likely we're very likely to break down the call here on Comm Center once it does get released. But it may become one of the most important pieces of evidence. Now, Drew, Patrick has decided to testify for the defense. Can you tell us why the 911 call would be so important to the investigation and why it's such important evidence in trial?
Well, I want to talk about the human side of this whole thing to begin with, because you have completely humanized the 3 victims here. And, Lindsay made an attempt on her own life after doing what she's accused of doing and leaving it for her husband, Patrick, to come home and find. But what was the first reaction he had? To call 911, and this is kind of the point we've always made.
The Commonwealth has filed a motion to include Patrick Clancy's 911 call at trial. They say shows, quote, deliberate premeditation, extreme atrocity, or cruelty at the hands of Lindsay Clancy. According to the Commonwealth, the 911 recording depicts Patrick Clancy running into the home and calling out for his kids before finding the bodies of Cora, Dawson, and Callan in the basement. As police headed into the basement, Mr. Clancy yelled out, "She killed the kids."
So I'm going to put a question back to you, as I've done in the past. What does this kind of phone call, he's describing exactly what he's seeing in front of him, and you're hearing that as a 911 dispatcher, but what kind of toll does this take while it's happening and in the aftermath when you hit the end button?
This call is like so many, where as a 911 dispatcher, you're invited into somebody's worst day. I won't say that taking the 911 call from Patrick is comparable to being Patrick, or it's comparable to being the police officers who rushed to the scene, found what Patrick did, and then tried in vain to save the life of a baby. But as you're taking that call and you're listening to it, the fact that you don't have a complete picture lets your mind run wild with what you're possibly seeing. You're only getting vivid descriptions and unfiltered emotion being poured directly into your brain as you are seated with the responsibility of trying to change the outcome. That's what your ultimate responsibility is as a 911 dispatcher. You're being told something that's happening right now. It's the stuff of nightmares, and it's up to you to change something. You need to send an ambulance, you need to send a police car, and no matter what you do, no matter which switches you throw, buttons you press, you can't make it happen fast enough. And of course, 3 little children passing away. You'd give anything to make that undone, to undo that. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things as a 911 dispatcher. We all get into it to affect that positive outcome. And we hate the calls where we can't change anything, Drew.
Okay, so you're hearing the raw terror, first of all. Like, you're hearing the moments that this guy is discovering what he's discovering. We're talking about within 10, 15 seconds. And you're hearing that as a 911 operator. And the police get there, and though things are very gruesome, and I want to talk a little bit in a minute about what the police saw when they got there. But the police make this gruesome discovery. The husband makes this gruesome discovery, and the first person they call is a 911 dispatcher. If we fast forward to the end of the night or the end of the shift, I think there is a perception that people have that the 911 operator knows everything that the detectives know or that the police know. Can you talk about like what kind of information you actually get from the people that respond to the scene?
A situation like this, immediately when the 911 call gets in, all you're getting is terrible vital signs. Is the child breathing? You're getting no. And I have to imagine, I haven't heard the call yet, but the call from Patrick had to be hysterical to the point where you're not getting any meaningful information out of him at all. But it actually gets worse on the scene once you put a rational police officer there, and all of a sudden you're hearing him become irrational as he's facing down a nightmare as a police officer. You know, you can imagine scooping up an infant that's clinging to life and hearing the way that his voice will change as he's getting on the radio indicating, you know, that we need some sort of special trauma care or additional ambulance or additional unit, or calling out to other officers for help. If your stomach hadn't turned over, the officer going emotional will make your blood curdle, Drew.
And let me ask you about that, going way back to January of 2023. I mean, were you there? Were you covering it the day of the murders?
Yeah, unfortunately I was. And as a reporter, this was probably top 3 like worst crime scenes I've ever been to. I've been a reporter for a decade, so I've been to a lot of crime scenes. And I distinctly remember this one because it was nighttime and the police officers were crying. So that always stuck out to me because I was sent there as kind of like a breaking news situation. We didn't really know what was going on. You know, we were working to learn more information, but then there ended up being a press conference, I remember, like near the scene that night. And when I got there, the officers who were coming out of the house who were investigating were crying. So we knew, we being the media, we knew that something really serious had happened inside that house because it was obviously affecting law enforcement. And it was just like the most somber, heartbreaking, like otherworldly, unbelievable crime scene I've ever been sent to.
Right. By the end of the shift, has an officer called you and told you what they've experienced, or you mentioned a minute ago, it's kind of a theater of the mind and you're left to fill in a lot of blanks. Does somebody fill in those blanks for you?
No, we rarely, if ever, find out what goes on. There's some exceptions sometimes with cases like this that are extraordinary. This is obviously for every dispatcher and police officer and paramedic involved. This is a once in a lifetime career. This is going to be the thing that they remember. This is the thing that they're going to have nightmares about and tell people about 20 years from now. This is sort of the ultimate war story of their career. But on a typical call, and I say typical because emergencies are typical for us, once the units arrive on scene, unless they ask for anything else that's indicative of something that's happened, like asking for the coroner to arrive, we don't have any idea what happened, and there's very little follow-up for us.
So I don't want to lecture people. I just want to give them something to think about for a second, and we'll move on to the next point. It's one thing to be viewed as Superman or some kind of superhero, like as in you're expected to shut off all emotions if you're a police officer, and you're not supposed to experience emotion. You're supposed to just, handle business, just like 911 operators do, but people overlook all the time. So if it's that much of a gruesome scene for a police officer to actually see, experience, and have that reaction while they're in the process of doing their job, I just want you as the public to imagine what is going through that dispatcher, that 911 operator, that person that took the initial call. I want you to understand what's going through their brain and understand they don't get the other half of it. The other half of the story is that the officers had to experience the gruesome scene, and they had to see the young children laying there, and they had to see Lindsay Clancy, who had jumped from the second floor, and they had to see the exercise bands and all this other stuff. The 911 operator never gets the rest of the story. So they have to fill in those blanks in their mind, just like John mentioned a minute ago, and forever and ever and ever have to live with those blanks filled in. So this is why I say, and the research that I've done backs this up, that the traumatic experience of a 911 dispatcher is sometimes greater, but at a minimum equal to what the traumatic experience of a police officer, firefighter, paramedic, because of that. They're hearing it raw. They can't climb through the phone to help anybody. They can't affect the outcome, and that's what they're wanting to do. Then they never get to draw on the scene itself. They have to draw on what their mind, the DVD player in their mind tells them to what the scene looks like. So I'm just trying to put in perspective. The next time you criticize a 911 operator or some kind of dispatcher for a snippy response, this is where it comes from. John is trying to get the information the best he can to get the best help to you as fast as possible. And John being, representative of the profession, but he also has to endure everything that we just talked about. And it's a nightmare. It's a complete nightmare. And it's not equivalent pay to what a first responder gets, and it's not equivalent retirement, and it's certainly not equivalent recognition. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, John. We can get back to the case, either stick with point one or we can move on.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning the vicarious trauma that dispatchers go through, and trauma is trauma. We're not in competition with police officers,
Right.
firefighters, EMTs, or anyone else to say who's been traumatized more. It's just everyone has that, and we don't have a way of resolving a lot of those things, and we're not understood for having those problems in our profession. But I do want to get back to the evidentiary value of the 911 call, because as I mentioned, the defense tried to exclude in part or in whole the 911 call. So it's going to definitely have some evidentiary value. I think it matters a lot since Patrick has decided that he's going to testify for the defense. He's testifying for his wife, but this 911 call that he made certainly contains probably statements that are not in Lindsay's best interest. So it's extremely important that we get that admitted. This call that he made and these statements that he made, these are immediate observations that he made while the emergency was happening. So while he was under stress, the statements that he made can carry significant weight, even if he feels differently now that he's going to trial and this is all, 2 years behind him and he's trying to go to bat for his wife. Prosecutors are going to be able to compare whatever he says on the stand to what he says during that call. And if there's any discrepancies, as a matter of fact, as to what occurred during the emergency, they can use that recording to impeach him. But just knowing that what's on the 911 call is already on the record I think it's going to change the scope of what Patrick's going to talk about. My guess is that they're not really going to do a deep dive on what occurred that day, but they're going to be talking to Patrick about, what was going on with his wife before. And of course, I could be wrong. Maybe there's no strong evidentiary value in terms of statements made by Patrick on the 911 call. It could also be this, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, Drew, that the 911 call is so painful, so emotional to listen to, that an attorney would say it's unduly prejudicial, that if a jury has to hear the emotions that Patrick endured and that the 911 dispatcher endured, that they're just going to want to convict whoever's right in front of them, Drew. That just is a testament to how emotional that these things can be.
Lindsay Clancy is in a wheelchair as a result of this incident. That's going to weigh heavily on the jury as well. Like it in a sense lends to her consciousness of guilt, but that 911 call, John, you're right, is probably so shocking that, it would, I think it may unduly prejudice the jury, but also maybe they need to hear that. Maybe they need to hear the raw emotion of somebody giving a play-by-play of exactly what they're seeing.
You mentioned that she's in a wheelchair as a result of her attempt to jump out the window and what that means as to whether or not that's evidence of her guilt. That's the second big thing that you need to know about this trial, is that we have all this evidence admitted, but a lot of it is actually open to interpretation. It's not about what the evidence is that's on the table, but what it means. Now, police recovered a lot of evidence from the scene, and almost all of it says something about what happened. So they located these exercise resistance bands, or the murder weapons, medications. This is going to be huge. The question is going to be asked, was Lindsay over-medicated for some depression and anxiety she was going through? Is she on anti-anxiety meds that are no longer part of her prescription plan, and now she's going through withdrawal? They located a bloody knife. Is this what she actually used to harm herself with? She had self-inflicted lacerations before she threw herself out the window. And probably the biggest thing of all, Drew, just like so many cases we've covered in Comm Center, Lindsay's phone, her computers, her notes. This is going to be the big thing. The digital evidence is what has given the prosecution their biggest insights into Lindsay's state of mind. And it's the basis of their entire theory. Prosecutors say that Lindsay's digital evidence paints a picture of planning to kill her children. They point to phone notes discussing her difficulty to bond with her older children, even though they were just 5 and 3. Those are her older kids. And that they were keeping her from having a brand new mom experience with her newborn baby, Callan. Lindsay was using mapping software, Google Maps or something similar, to estimate how long Patrick would be gone. She wanted to know if he went to this 3V restaurant and to CVS on a round trip, how long he would be gone for. The attack on the children was not spontaneous. It's not like one of the kids make a mess and she flew into a wild fury and decided to destroy her own family. No, she had been planning this for some time. And 4 days before the murder, Drew, another famous Google search like the one that was in the Karen Reed trial. This time is, can you treat a sociopath? All of this shows methodical preparation. Wasn't a heat of the moment thing. She'd been long time planning it. Asking the internet if a sociopath can be treated is some real inner self-reflection. It shows that she had some understanding that something was wrong with her. The defense is going to look at much of this and all of this evidence, and they're going to argue that it all means something entirely different. So get ready for a battle of experts, Drew. Instead of planning by a rational mind, these experts and the defense is going to argue that Lindsay is a woman descending into postpartum psychosis, and she's a person desperately trying to understand the thoughts that she was having, the things that she was thinking that frightened her. It didn't stop her, though. It's the same evidence. It's two completely different interpretations. But Drew, let me ask you this. Do you think that the evidence can support both of these interpretations, that the evidence of her planning shows that she had real criminal intent to kill? Or do you think the fact that she, as a mother and as a labor and delivery nurse, someone that you would trust above all others with your children, the fact that she's even planning to destroy her own children, is that evidence of a diseased mind? And how will these competing experts manage to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt either way? What's going to be the deciding factor? The notes, the Google searches, her psychiatric treatment, her medications. What stood out most to you?
This is the dilemma that I personally always run into, because, I try hard to separate somebody who is not in their right mind with the human being that operated up to that point. And it's very clear that she wasn't in her right mind, whether it was an alteration because of drugs or an overuse or too much of a prescription or whatever, or if this was just cold and calculated. You're right. This is going to turn into the battle of the experts. They're going to try to, one side's going to try to say, no, she would never do this. She was a labor and delivery nurse. She loved those kids. And quite frankly, I know that there is evil in the world, and I know that really, really bad things happen and really good people do really bad things at times. But this is a head scratcher. I mean, who would go through the pains of labor of 3 beautiful children, by all indications have a beautiful family, and then, want to remove herself from the planet, but take her 3 kids with her? And you're right. She, the digital evidence is going to talk about how she sent him kind of, this is the morbidity of doing a homicide investigation. You're looking into, where she sent him and why she sent him there. And is she looking at distances and time for her to, carry out her plan? But this is just like the Mickey Stein's case that we've been following. This trial is probably going to come up before Mickey Stein's case. But, when you first hear the shocking, gory details as a layperson in the news, you see a mother that killed her 3 kids while she attempted suicide. When you start digging it, just like with Mickey Stein's, we literally saw him in the judge's chambers having this disagreement with the judge, and he shot him dead. As Grady Judd would say, graveyard dead.
Graveyard dead.
When the battle of the experts, meets in the courtroom, you have to wonder, were either of them in their right mind? Was this true manic or true mental health episodes? Mental health is completely overused as a term these days. I completely understand that. But it's pretty obvious that nobody who kills is they're in some kind of mental health distress, because I don't think anybody actually wants to do that. I guess, maybe that's the sociopath argument. But I don't know what the evidence is going to say. I think that the evidence is going to point towards, she calculated it, but then you have to kind of 10,000 foot view of why did she calculate that? What is behind that? Had she talked about divorce? Had she talked about what had she seen as a labor and delivery nurse? Or, it's just, I think it's a very complicated issue that can easily be distilled down to, well, she's a crazy woman and she killed her kids.
Yeah, that's what the conclusion you come to when you look at the facts of this case, and your stomach turns and you don't want to look any closer. But I think you drive it at an important disparity. You talk about mental health or mental illness and how, that's really a scale. That's a spectrum. Like, how unwell are you? Are you functional? Are you not functional? Do you realize the difference between right and wrong? Do you realize the difference between lawful and unlawful? But Drew, there's a disparity between the spectrum of mental health and then the legal status that is sanity. People say insane or sane as though it's a medical term, but it's actually a legal term. It's understanding whether or not the actions that you're taking at the time that you're doing them are right or wrong. So we can all agree from what happened that Lindsay Clancy has some degree of mental illness, but the jury's not going to be deciding that. They're not going to be interpreting this evidence to figure out whether or not she's mentally ill. I think that's a foregone conclusion just based off of what happened. But you need to know at the moment that she decided to take out these exercise resistance bands and put them around the neck of a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an 8-month-old, did she know that that was right or wrong? And you really have to pick this apart. You really have to parse this out to its most granular terms, because her planning itself, all the steps that she was taking in furtherance of this criminal action, it was all very rational, like trying to figure out how long you're going to be alone with the children, researching ways to kill people. These are things that Lindsay did. They're very rational, but the plan itself is not rational. Okay, so if she's having problems bonding with her older children and that's keeping her from having the relationship she wants with her 8-month-old, why did she kill the 8-month-old? If killing her children is what she needs to do to get to her best life, why did she attempt to take hers? And even if she hadn't made that attempt, Drew, certainly no one thinks that they're going to achieve their life goals of having an easier life or fewer responsibilities in their life by ridding themselves with their children. She's not going to be able to start over and have another child and have the brand new mommy experience. That's not rational thinking. So the process by which she goes through this is very rational, but the plan itself is not rational. And the battle of experts is going to be there, Drew, to kind of parse that out, and hopefully the jury can come to some kind of conclusion. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a hung jury. But Drew, there's one last thing, the big thing that we need to know to understand why this case is different. And I'm going to tell you, trying to go through this and understand all of it, I'm going to have to constantly be reminding myself of this, because the rules for an affirmative defense in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are more confusing than the overtime rules that the NFL, okay? It's very hard to understand this. This is very different than even how it is in other cases. So as you watch this trial unfold, as it comes up, to understand what's happening in the courtroom, you need to understand why it's so unusual. In many jurisdictions, insanity is what we call an affirmative defense. It's where you say, yes, I did this, but, okay? Ordinarily, the burden of proof is on the state to prove that somebody is guilty. But when you take an affirmative defense, it means that the burden of proof shifts to the defendant. So think about Sarah Boone, right? She argued that she had some kind of battered spouse syndrome. Yes, she killed George Torres, but it wasn't her fault. She lost, by the way. Carmelo Anthony argued in an affirmative defense. He said he was acting in self-defense when he stabbed Austin Metcalf. He also lost. But most notably, Andrea Yates, I'm not sure if you've heard of this case, Drew, but she argued insanity when she admitted to drowning her 5 children. The jury ultimately found her not guilty by reason of insanity at retrial. So the prospects of an affirmative defense statistically are not good, but it does happen with the case of Andrea Yates. We're familiar with the concept. The defendant has to prove their point when they say, I'm not guilty because of this. Massachusetts does it differently. They do it the exact opposite way. Once criminal responsibility is raised as a question in the court, the burden remains on the Commonwealth, even if the defendant says that she's taking an affirmative defense. Prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lindsay committed these terrible acts, but they also have to prove that she was responsible when she committed them. They have to prove that she was sane. And that's the central legal battle of this trial. Was Lindsay sane? And unlike other cases where the defendant has to prove themselves insane, the state has to prove her sane in this one. So you can expect both sides to be calling psychiatrists, medical experts, people that can talk about the medicine. The husband's certainly going to be important when talking about her state of mind prior to that day. You know, what was Lindsay like when he got in the car to go off to the restaurant? The jury, not the doctors, are ultimately going to decide whether or not Lindsay is criminally responsible for killing her children. Drew, let me ask you this. Do you think that the system is better? They have to do double duty. They have to prove that she did it and that she was sane. Do you think that this is unfair, that a defendant claims to be insane, but they don't have to prove that? That's still the burden of proof is still on the state? Like, what do you think?
I'm not a fan of it. I mean, I do think that sane people do insane things like over time. So, something like postpartum psychosis is not like maybe a steady illness. Maybe it's a peak and valley type situation, but I'm not a fan of the way the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does. But that's the business of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the people that live there. That's what they want. That's what they voted for. That's their legislation, And so, I don't know that the state should have to prove that she was sane just to be able to prove her criminal intent. Like,
right. It's kind of crazy that the route that she's taking, the mode of defense she's taking, requires the state to double down on her efforts. Normally, it's enough to just say, you did these things. Even if you don't have a motive for them, you're just proving that somebody did them through evidence, both direct and circumstantial. But in this one, she says, well, I did it, but I'm not guilty for this reason. So now the state has to, it's almost like a stipulation to the guilt, but they still have to prove it. They have to prove it to the jury. Otherwise the intent doesn't matter if they can't prove that Lindsay actually did it. They have to prove double the load. They have to make sure that they can prove that someone was sane. And Drew, you actually drew up another point about the difference between sanity and temporary insanity. I think it's easy to claim that you were temporarily insane because, what's the barometer for that? You're not wearing some piece of, your smartwatch isn't going to clock whether or not you go temporarily insane. So it's all going to be speculative at best. You're going to have lots of people weighing in on what could have been happening to her. But the truth is that only Lindsay knows, and the jury is going to have to be guided by the experts, but they're going to have to look at Lindsay. They're going to have to put themselves in her shoes. They're going to have to try to understand her, and they're ultimately going to have to draw a conclusion that's extremely weighty. But to be honest, it's a very, very sad. There's a ton of evidence about Lindsay killing her kids, and we're going to choose a different interpretation one way or the other, and whether or not she was coldly calculating and ridding herself of her children, or that she was insane and that she no longer knew the difference between right or wrong or legal or illegal anyway. And the 911 call is going to be a critical piece of evidence. The jury is going to confront the truth on what happened that day live, is like the police officers did and as Patrick did. And Massachusetts plays by these crazy rules that we're going to have to constantly remind ourselves of. We'll be watching this trial and we'll tell you everything that you need to know as it happens, as it unfolds, and we'll be breaking things down on this channel. And frankly, we have the expertise here that other channels don't have. I, as a 911 dispatcher, am uniquely qualified to pick apart that 911 call, tell you what it means, tell you what the dispatcher was thinking, how it formed the police officer's initial impression on their approach. And Drew, as a 29-year cop, is going to be able to take you through aspects of that investigation. And as an expert on witness interview and interrogation, he's going to be very insightful breaking down the testimony that's on the stand. So if you want to see more coverage like this, and if you're still watching at this point, it means you like the episode, make sure you hit like and subscribe, and check out our other episodes like Carmelo Anthony. We broke down the body cam video. Mickey Steins, that case is also heating up, and Caleb Flynn as well. Drew, any closing thoughts on this case before we go?
Yeah, I'm just glad. Look, it's hard to be just, we as a show talk about the facts, and it's hard to separate emotion from facts in a case like this, and things get heated in the comments section, and I understand why, but like all we're trying to do is just give you the straight information. I don't condone what Lindsay Clancy did, whether it was an insanity or whether she was completely sane and plan this whole thing out. We're just here to discuss what both sides are kind of seeing. And I think it's healthy in a way that we can have this forum where we can discuss what John, as an active 911 dispatcher, actually goes through in a call, something like this. So it humanizes his profession, and you can also understand what an investigator goes through in something like this. Nobody wants to see this. Like, so as much as I say, like, keep the 911 operator in mind, keep the police officers, crime scene technicians, all the other people that had to respond to this, keep them in mind. Obviously, the first and foremost in my heart is the three children, like, and even the husband who's got a long road ahead, and Lindsay herself. I mean, like, yeah, she may be the monster that everybody thinks that she is, or that a lot of people think that she is, but she may not be. She might be having this moment of reckoning of like, oh my God, what did I do? And she's going to have to pay for it one way or another. But just bear in mind, none of these cases are straightforward, and it's hard to get on here and tell the truth, to be honest, because people like other people who tell them what they want to hear. We tend to lean towards telling you what you need to hear.
Right. I think it's something that we need to restate now in every episode is that you can understand somebody, whether it's Lindsay Clancy or Carmelo Anthony or whoever else, you can understand them without condoning what they did. So
right.
I hope that nobody gets in the comments section and thinks that we're on the side of murdering children. I hate to say that, but this is YouTube. So
definitely anti-murder.
We don't condone it, but we need to, this is the essential legal battle is understanding Lindsay Clancy. What was she thinking? That's what's at stake. That's what the question is in this trial. Now, whether or not she did it, we're past that.
Yeah, we're well past that.
We need to figure out what she was thinking. And so to do that, you have to empathize with her. That's the definition of empathy, is figuring out what someone's thinking and feeling. That's what this is. This is going to be an empathetic trial. Drew, thanks so much for all your comments and all your insight. I look forward to covering this case with you. I appreciate it. All right, guys, thanks for watching this episode of Comm Center. Make sure you check out all our other videos, and we will catch you back here next time.
911 emergency, police or paramedics.
He's going westbound on foot. Westbound on foot.